In the previous video, we learned how to install Laravel on Valet, and in this video, we're going to learn about the directory structure of Laravel folders, files, etc. Okay, so let's begin then. So there are different things like controllers, models, views, migration files, upload files, all of these in Laravel, which I will explain to you in detail in the coming videos. But let's just keep it simple to understand the directory structure of Laravel. Okay, so I'm just going to open up the project that we had created in the previous video, which we had just installed it. Just a moment. So this is my project called My New Project. I'm going to use Valet to go ahead and use and show it to you. However, if you want to use it on the Windows, then you know already how to use that. You just need to do PHP artisan serve on the terminal on the command line, and that's all you have to do to be able to use, and it'll be available on that particular site. My previous video will show you how to use that, how to run your site on the Windows as well. So we'll just stick to Valet. Okay, so let's begin with the views first. So views are the ones which allow you to see what you're seeing over here on your project on the front end. So all the view files would end with .blade .php. So .blade means and refers to the Blade templating engine, which I will explain in the coming videos as well. Okay, so first is the view. So where does the view exist? So the view exists in the resources directory. So this is the resources directory, and then inside of this you have views, and this is the default view, welcome.blade.php. Okay, so all of the content that you see right here on your site, Laravel, documentation, Laracast, all of this is coming from this file. Okay, as you can see, documentation, Laracast, news, Forge, etc. If I make any changes over here, if I just go ahead and write something over here, let Laravel test, let us save it and go back over here, you can see it says Laravel test. You can even delete this whole file, and delete the content of this file and make your own, and just write anything you want over here, and probably change this view file as well, like this. You can see now it's test. Okay, so you can do all of that, but let's leave it to the normal as it was before. Okay, so this is where your view file stay, and all of the view file that you gonna show it to the user on the front end will need to be inside of these views directory. Okay, if any of this doesn't make sense to you, don't worry about it. I promise you by the end of few more videos you will be very comfortable with working with this, and it will all be clear to you, so just bear with me. Okay, so next thing comes the models. So models are basically the file where which helps you interact with the database. So model exists inside of the app directory. So for example, this user.php, this is your model file, so this is where it will stay inside of the app directory. Okay, and you have this fillable hidden, which I will explain to you in the coming videos what all of this. Okay, again, then you have controllers. Controllers are the one, as I explained to you earlier, allows you to interact between the views and the models and take the HTTP request. So if I had to show that to you, whenever an HTTP request comes, for example, for your my new project.test, this is my HTTP request that comes over here. It goes to the route, which is basically which I'll explain to you. Where does this route exist? So route exists in the web.php inside of the route folder, web.php. So you can see this route. So this is the route file, and this means that this is the get request, and this means that this is the home directory. Okay, and then there's a function which is going to load the view, which is welcome. So the welcome.blade.php, this file is being loaded by this view function using welcome. Okay, now this is just an overview of the Laravel directory, guys, so don't worry about it if something doesn't make sense to you just yet. It will be eventually. Okay, so then you have the controller. So whenever this route comes, so for example, when the user goes ahead and tries to access this site, so whenever he makes an HTTP request over here, it comes to the route first, which is web.php. So it comes over here, okay, and it goes to the home directory, and this function is basically calling the welcome view. Okay, then it can go either directly to load the view from here to here, or you can have a controller in between. Okay, and that controller will interact with the model file, and that model will interact with the database, return some data, and all the calculation happens over here, and then that is returned to the view. This is just the basic understanding, so just just need to understand, don't need to understand it deeply, but this is just the basic understanding of these files. Okay, so these are now the controllers. So the controllers would reside in app HTTP controllers. So this is app, then HTTP, and this is the controllers folder. This is where the controllers live in. Default file of controller is controller.php. This is the namespacing, which means it's including the controllers class over here, and this is basically controller. Controller is extending the base controller class and all that stuff, right? Okay, so you've got models, views, controllers, then comes the migration file. So migration file reside in the database directory, guys. So I'll just show that to you. So here is the database directory. Let's close this one. And you go to migrations, and you can see that these are the two default migration files. So these are the ones responsible to create the database. Okay, so this is where you define the settings of the database, like the column name and what are the columns will be there, what will be the name of the table, etc. Okay, there is one for password as well. Okay, so if you go on to over here, this user table basically is coming from this particular migration file. Okay, great. Then comes the upload file. So where do the uploads go to whenever you try to store some images? Where do they go to? So it goes to the storage. Yeah, it goes to the storage directory over here, and inside of app public, and this is where it'll go. Okay, then comes the database, email, app URL setting. So all of that information goes in the .env file, .env. So this is the .env file, which is in the root directory of your project. It contains the database settings like MySQL, database host, port, database name, password. All of that information gets stored over here. And then the app name, the URL which you're trying to access. You have the mail settings over here. Then you have the API push app key, etc. So all of this information goes over there. Okay, then comes the CSS and JS files. So where do they all live? So they live in the public directory over here. Let me just close all of this to avoid confusion. Okay, so there is the public directory, and you can see this is the CSS. This is the default app.css that live over here. And then this is the JS folder inside of which your default JS file live. And if you just include these two, automatically the bootstrap will be included. Which is provided by Laravel by default. You don't need to include the external bootstrap JS and CSS files. Then you have the main important file called app.php, which resides inside of the app directory, not app actually, config directory. So then you have config and you have app.php. So here is the name of the app. If you change this, the app name will change. So let's say if I make it Laravel's. Let me see if something changes. Yeah, so in the settings that are the app name will change basically. Then you have the environment, so it's production over here. Let's keep it to that. Let's not touch all of that. Okay, then you have debug mode. We can change it to false or true. And then you have the URL. This is basically, you can change it in case if you are resetting the passwords, etc. So you can make sure you change this if you're using it on a live server. And you have time zones, locale, fallback, all of that stuff. And then comes the providers. Okay, so these are basically service providers. So if you want to add any additional settings over here, you can add it and include some extra providers. Then you have aliases, so you can include the extra aliases over here as well. So that's all about that. Then comes the service provider. So service provider is included in the service provider into the app directory again. So if you go on to the app, go to providers, and these are basically the service providers. Okay, so this is pretty much the the main directories that you will be using throughout the projects. You don't really need to know everything in one go, but these are the ones which you will very often use, like the public directory for your CSS and JS, your app directory for your controllers and your models, then your resources views directory for your view files, NV file for your database settings, etc., storage to store your upload directories and all of that. Okay, so pretty much that's what you need to do as basics for the directory structure. You will get used to it. You don't really need to remember it, but as and when you start working with different projects, I promise you'll remember it by default. I did. Okay, I'll see you in the next video. In the next video, we'll start with controllers. We'll start with the routes, basically. Okay, so we'll start with the routes in the next video. See you then.